How are you?
Okay, we are live.
Good.
We're live. Why is the video coming through? There we go. Okay, we're live. Live everywhere. Is there Zoom or on Facebook or?
Okay, good to go. Tell me if it's not loud enough. So, good evening, everybody. We're here to learn the Louis Nishmat Tova Matal Bat Yisrael Dov. She was a teacher of mine, Rebbetzin Tova Rhein. She worked at Lindenbaum for many years, for decades. She was one of the heads of Lindenbaum when I studied there in 2011. Tova was a very warm and generous person, both her and her husband. She actually came to Australia a long time ago. She was my father's madricha in Counterpoint in Scopus about 40-something years ago. So she knew Melbourne, she knew some people, and she was a very special educator, very special person who was incredibly warm and generous and caring and sensitive, and she opened her home to all her students. And I spent time there, and I really can't believe that I'm giving a shiur in honor of her, and she passed away on Shabbat. So this is a parasha shiur. This week's parasha is Shlach Lecha. We're going to be looking about and talking at the sin of the Meraglim. We're going to be talking about Yoshua, Kalev, Moshe, Aaron, and we'll also along the way discover a message, an essential lesson that actually is something that Rebbetzin Tova lived by. Okay. So the chet of the Meraglim, the spies, 12 spies are sent into the land, and they come back and they give a bad report of the land, saying it's too filled with giants, it's too unconquerable, we're never going to make it, we should just turn around, go back and die in Egypt. This sin has a profound effect for a very long time, both on Moshe and Aaron, who fall on their faces and they're crying. Also has a long-term effect on all of Am Yisrael. Of course, there's the condemnation to wander in the desert for 40 years, and a whole generation is doomed to die in the desert. And this is incredibly psychologically disturbing. The Midrash even talks about that people would dig a grave and go to sleep for the night, so that if they die overnight, their families wouldn't have to bury them. They would already be in their graves. If you can imagine the torture of digging a grave for your bed every single night, thinking you're not going to wake up in the morning. So this generation suffers tremendously. Of course, also we have the Midrash brought in Rashi, that this is the day of Tisha B'Av, that Am Yisrael are crying so much, Hashem gets really angry with them like a good father and says, you're crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about, I'm going to destroy both the Batei Mikdash on Tisha B'Av itself. So this is a long-term effect, a long-term impact of the chet of the Meraglim. Okay, so 12 people go into the land, 12 come back, and they all say a bad report, except for 2 people who defend the land. Which 2 people? Yoshua and Kalev, exactly. Both of them say we can conquer the land. Excellent. Except they don't. They don't both say that. We'll see who says what and exactly where and exactly why. In Shmot, Perek Yud Gimel, if you have a Tanakh with you, or a Chumash. Shmot, Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Kaf Vav, Ve'yashvu mitu ha'aretz miket 40 yom. So at the end of 40 days, they return from scouting the land. This is Midah Keneged Midah, 40 days, 40 years. V'yalchu ve'yavo el Moshe ve'el Aaron, el kol adat b'nei Yisrael, el midbar paran, k'tashav yishvu otam, dvar et kol ha'edav yirim et pri ha'aretz. They went straight to Moshe and Aaron, and the whole community is a Kadesh in a place called Paran. They made the report, and everybody heard them. And they showed them the fruits and what they brought back. And they said, this is the land that does indeed, it flows with milk and with honey. This is, of course, not cow's milk and not bee's honey, but goat's milk and the honey from dates. So silan is what they're talking about here. However, they say, Efet ki ez hayam hasheva aretz v'ayarim b'tzorot gdola me'od v'gam yaldei ha'anak re'ino sham. However, the people who inhabit this land are powerful and the cities are fortified. And we saw this particularly frightening group of people, the Anakim there. And the Amalek is there, Yoshev Ba'aretz, and the Hittites, the Hamasur, V'Amari, and everybody that we are afraid of, everybody that we cannot conquer, they are all over this land. Quickly, V'ha'as Kalev et ha'am. Kalev quickly shushed the people and said, stop with the crying, stop what you're doing. El Moshe ve'amar alo na'aleh ve'arshunu otak ki yachol nochala. Alo na'aleh, the motto of Bnei Akiva, let us all, means go up. We will succeed and we shall gain possession of the land. We can do this. We can easily conquer this land. But the people who went with him, they disagreed and they say, Lo nochala el hayam ki chazaku mimenu. They are too strong for us. We cannot defeat them at all. Yoshua here says nothing. Yoshua does not defend the land of Israel at all. Kalev stands alone. Continuing on into Perek Yud Daled, we see that this, in Perek Yud Gimel, the first half, is a complaint, a worry. They're afraid that they will not be able to conquer the land of Israel. But they continue on into Perek Yud Daled, and their conversation takes a turn. Pasuk Aleph, Vatisa kol hayadai vetnu et kolam v'chu ha'am balayla ho. And the community broke into cries, and they cried the whole night through. V'yalnu al Moshe v'al Aaron kol bnei Yisrael v'amru alehem kol hayadai lo matanu be'eretz Mitzrayim o b'midbar hazeh lo matanu. They turn now against Moshe and Aaron, and they say to them, if only we had died in Egypt, if only we never left and we won't have to die in this midbar. Here they've taken a turn from being worried that they cannot conquer the land of Israel to rebelling against the leadership. And at this point, Moshe and Aaron, after they say, we're better for us to go back to Egypt, let us go back there. Vayapol Moshe v'Aaron al panehem. Moshe and Aaron fall on their faces in front of the whole of Bnei Israel. And they are taking a very humbling, a very strong stance of failure to say, we took you out, everything we've suffered, everything we've been through, and you just want to go back to Egypt and die in Egypt. What was it all for? And at this point, Yoshua steps in. Yoshua ben Nun v'Kalev, so Kalev also with him together, ben Yefuneh, the son of Yefuneh, min hatarim ve'et ha'aretz karob b'gdehem. These are the people who were also a part of the spies, and they tear their clothing, and they keep talking. They talk to all of Am Yisrael, lemor ha'aretz asher avarnu v'ala torata tova ha'aretz me'od me'od. This is a beautiful land. This is an exceedingly good land. Im chafutz banu Hashem v'yavi otanu el ha'aretz hazot. If Hashem brought us here and He's happy with us, He's going to give it to us. This beautiful land that we think is so gorgeous, Hashem brought us here, He's giving it to us. That means that we'll succeed. We're going to be fine. Only ba'Hashem al tamrudu. Do not rebel against Hashem. Just trust in the Lord. Everything's going to be okay. So here we have two different I would say, episodes in the actual sin itself. First, we have the complaint of the people, which is more a manifestation of their worry that they will not be able to conquer the land. And the second is an actual turning on the leadership themselves and blaming them and saying, you should have let us die in Egypt. In the first half, Kalev speaks out and says courageously by himself, no, we can do this, we got this, don't worry. In the second half, Yoshua and Kalev speak up together and say, but Hashem brought us here. If He brought us here, He means for us to be able to do this. Don't worry, just trust in Hashem. Why doesn't Yoshua speak up any earlier? This is a very interesting question, I think, that we'll discover in a moment. First, we'll just look at Hashem's reaction and how Yoshua and Kalev are treated differently by Hashem here. I would call punishments 1 and punishments 2 maybe. In Pasuk, still in Perek Yud Daled, in Pasuk, what have I got? Yud Aleph. V'yamer Hashem el Moshe ad ana enantzoni ha'am hazeh ve'ad ana lo yaminu vi b'chol ha'otot asher aseti b'koro. Hashem says, how can they turn on me like this after everything I have done for them? What am I ever going to do with them? Aknu b'dvar ve'yarshanu ve'esei otcha legoy gadol ve'atzvo mimenu. I am going to annihilate them. I've had enough. I'm done. Get rid of them all. Hashem is just filled with anger and despair and frustration, and he just does not want to deal with these people anymore. And Moshe defends the people and stops Hashem from just wiping them all out. In Pasuk Kafav, in the same perek, Pasuk Kafav, v'deber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron lemor, ad matai le'edeh hara azod asher hem melinim alai et lunatam b'nei Yisrael asher hem melinim alai shemati. The Lord spoke Hashem. Hashem spoke again to Moshe and said, how much longer are they going to keep muttering? Are they going to keep talking? Are they going to keep whispering against me? Okay, I've had enough of them. Say to them, again, he repeats the same thing back to them, right? In this very wilderness, in this wilderness, you're all going to die. None of you are going to settle the land, except Pasuk Lamed, Im atem tavo el arz asher nesati et yadi l'shchenetchem ki im Kalev ben Yefona veYoshua ben Nun. Here Yoshua and Kalev are both saved. They are going to go into the land in the second phase of the punishment. But in the first phase of the punishment, I jumped over, but we'll go back. Only Kalev is saved in Pasuk Kaf Daled. Ve'avdi Kalev yakev hayeti ruach acheret emo. Kalev, he had a different spirit, and he remained loyal to Hashem. Ve'haviotav ela aretz asher ba shma uzra rishoni. And into that land, I'm going to give to his inheritance. So we have 2 phases of the sin, 2 phases of the punishment, and Kalev and Yoshua could not be more separated from each other. They don't speak together except for the second time, and they're not saved together. The first part of the punishment, only Kalev is saved. In the second part of the punishment, Yoshua and Kalev are saved. And a reason is given for Kalev. He had a different spirit. He stood alone. He was courageous. He believed in the land. And so because of that, he gets to go in, and later we see and Yoshua is going in to be with the people. In Dvarim, which is of course the speech given by Moshe, later at the end of the 40 years, in Moshe's perspective, also Kalev and Yoshua are not placed together. In Perek Aleph, in Pasuk Lamed Hey, Im yira ish ben Hashem ha'eler, if any of these men, if this evil generation, if any of them that I swore that I would give it to their fathers, they will not go in. They will not see this land, any of them. Zolati Kalev ben Yefone, hu yirani. Except for Kalev ben Yefone, he is going to go in. And it's going to be given to him and to his children. Lamed Zayin, Gam bi hatanaf Hashem begalchem lemor, Gam ata lo tavo sham. None of you should go in. Even Moshe is not going in. Moshe, you're not allowed. Lamed Chet, Yoshua ben Nun ha'amed lefanecha, hu yavoshma. But Yoshua ben Nun, who is standing in front of you, he will go in. Because he is going to cause Israel to inherit. Because of him, they can inherit. We see here that Hashem and Moshe's words is giving also a reason why Yeshua is allowed to go in. Because Yeshua is helping them conquer it. Not through his own merit. Not because he deserves it himself. He didn't do anything that deserves saving. But he has to help the people to conquer. He is finishing the task that Moshe is not allowed to finish. So for the zchut of Moshe, Yeshua is being saved. But had it not been for that, he would have died with everybody else because he didn't speak up. Also in Sefer Yeshua, Kalev speaks for himself, and he also talks about how he stood alone. He gives an example. He explains what happened to him in Pasuk Chen in Perek Yudalid. V'achai asher elu ami, my nation went up against me. Hamitziv et lev ha'am, and they went with me in the heart of the people to melt. But I went with Hashem. I followed Hashem. I was alone. I was by myself, and He separates Himself from Yoshua. So from every possible reading, Yoshua and Kalev do not merit the same thing. They don't do the same thing, and they don't go together at all. So why doesn't Yoshua speak up any earlier? Yoshua is the disciple of Moshe before he inherits Moshe's mantle. He's his student, and a student is not allowed to speak up before their teacher does. Before Moshe reacts against the complaint, Yoshua has to be silent. Like we know in Eruvin, in the Gemara, a disciple is not permitted to judge in front of their teacher, in front of their master. He can't initiate anything while Moshe is silent. As soon as the people turn against Moshe, and Moshe has a reaction, and he's now involved, and he's now initiated a response, Yoshua can speak too. So perhaps Yoshua wanted maybe to speak with Kalev in the first instance, but he stopped himself, held himself back. You could read it. Or maybe he just didn't really share Kalev's worldview. Because Yoshua is not really the same as Kalev at all. Kalev has a ruach acher, a different spirit came over him. He is a real individual. He is really alone when he speaks out. The entire nation is against him, and he doesn't care at all. So Yoshua is definitely not the same as Kalev. But there is someone who does share a worldview with Kalev, who shares a lot of experiences with him, and that is Moshe. Moshe and, did I say Kalev? I meant Yoshua. Moshe and Yoshua share a worldview. They are the ones that are similar. They are the ones who share many experiences, similar experience, not the same experience. And Yoshua and Moshe's worldview is impacted through those experiences, and therefore their reactions come out from their lived experience. So Yoshua and Moshe careers have a bunch of similarities, which I think we have time to go into them. First, the most obvious one is they both meet with Hashem, and they both meet with Hashem on holy ground, and they're both told to take off their sandals. Obviously, this is the snare for Moshe, so he's in the desert, and he finds the bush that isn't burning, and Hashem tells him, take off your sandals because I am here. A similar thing happens to Yoshua. He meets with an angel, and the angel tells him, take off your sandals because you are standing on holy ground. Rav Litag teaches that these two independent scenarios, which have a lot of similarities, are actually pointing to the mission of their life. Moshe's life is to recognize Hashem and to bring it to everybody and to save the people from the fire. But Yeshua's angel is holding a sword, and his life mission is to conquer the land and to make it a place for Am Yisrael to live. That's their first similar experience. Their second is that they need a lot of affirmation, a lot of encouragement in their job, right? In Perek Gimel and Perek Dalet in Shmot, Moshe and Hashem argue back and forth, and Hashem pushes Moshe to do things and tells him you can do things and you should do things and I'm going to help you. And there's a very similar scenario that happens with Yoshua. He's reluctant to take up, to be the greatest leader, and Chazak ve'amatz is said to him, by him, that he's like affirming himself and affirming his own actions. And al tira ve'el tireta. Hashem tells him, don't worry, I'm with you. Don't worry, I'm with you. Don't worry, I'm with you. So many times, both of them require that same external affirmation so that they are able to perform the jobs they need to perform. They are both religious and political leaders, which is not so often well blended in Tanakh. Generally, one is good at one, not so good at the other. Or there's two, separate a religious and a political leader, but both Moshe and Yoshua do that job together. They both send spies into the land of Israel, which you'd think Yoshua would probably not do that. Really didn't work well the first time, but he does it. Moshe sends 12 unsuccessful spies. I guess Yeshua did learn a lesson. He sent only 2, and they were both successful. They said, yes, we can go, let's ready, we can go in. Also, they both experience a very similar episode at the water, they both experience a splitting of the sea. This is maybe the most striking similarity between them. When Moshe and Am Yisrael, they're standing at the Red Sea, and the Pharaoh's army is behind them, and a wind blows all night long, depending on which point in the parak you read it at, and the water is split and they walk through. So too, when Yeshua gets to the Yarden, all the water is blown by a wind all night long, and instead of the water being split, instead all the water moves, and Am Yisrael crosses onto dry land at the Yarden. This is a very similar experience that happens for one generation, happens for the next generation, really cementing the entering into the desert and the leaving of the desert in a very similar way, really bookending that experience for them. Also, both Yeshua and Moshe are involved in a plague of hail that comes down. Moshe's plague of hail, not Moshe's, but happens in the time of Moshe, is in Mitzrayim, the plague of the hail that is fire inside of it, and it comes down. Yeshua also experiences, other people experience it on Yeshua's behalf, a plague of hail that comes down onto their enemies, also with fire inside. Rav Meidan from the Gush, from the Yeshiva Har Etzion, says that this is a meteorite based on the Midrash that says the hail was coming, it was stopped, and it continued to fall at a later time, and that later time was Yeshua. So as soon as the plague of hail was finished with Moshe, it stopped midair, stayed there, and it fell during the time of Yeshua. So Rav Meidan says this is a meteor because you can see a meteor falling. It's ice with fire inside, and it can stay in orbit and fall at a later time. So that's one nice way to say that it's all a part of the same experience, happening for one, happening for another. I think another maybe the last most important striking similarity between Moshe and Yeshua is that they write the Torah. No other human touches the writing of the Torah. Moshe writes the whole thing except for the last 8 psukim because he has died. And Yeshua writes, Moshe died, and he finishes the next 7 psukim, and then he begins Sefer Yeshua. So there's a lot of very similar experiences between the two that can impact the way that they see the world, the way that they understand everything. Okay. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? I know there's people online. Questions? Comments? No? Okay.
I've got I guess it's just interesting, thinking again about the spies and the people's reaction and the way that you put it in the first part. It's like a worry, and it seems justified.
Right.
It's almost like they're saying, just checking, can you just make sure that we're actually going to be able to do this?
Right.
And how different it might have been if that affirmation had come then, that affirmation of, just trust Hashem, it's all going to be fine. What if that had happened at that point?
Yeah.
And that might have been a really different story.
I'll just repeat it for the people who can't hear. The comment was that it seems to be very legitimate worry of the spies that in the first half of their complaint instead of their rebellion, where they're genuinely worried about conquering this land. They're not a very militaristic people. They don't have a military history, and it's a legitimate worry that they had. And maybe if that affirmation of just trust in Hashem, it will be fine, had come earlier for them, the whole thing would have turned out differently. And I think that it's interesting to realize why maybe that's a part of it. Moshe and Aaron don't respond to the complaint at all. They kind of you're worried? Okay, maybe it's fair enough to be worried. I think it would be fair enough to be worried. They're bringing back these giant pieces of fruit. There are giants living there, and we don't have much experience at all. And Moshe and Aaron kind of, I think, legitimize it. You could say they legitimize it in the way that they don't respond to it. But the people don't stop at the worry. They keep going into something much worse, something much more, and really like biting the hand that feeds them. They're turning against Moshe and Aaron, and it really is turning against Hashem and saying, everything you did to take us out of Egypt, just let us die. There was no point. Every miraculous thing they've experienced to prove that Hashem will take care of them. Like, how much do these people need? Like, what else do they need? There's been like flashing neon signs the whole time. Hashem is with you. Hashem is with you. There's literally an kavod around them at the time. And still, they say, just kill us off here. We're just going to die. So just let us die now. And I think it's very to the point of why this generation can't actually go into Eretz Israel, because they can't live without that. They can't live without the constant corporeal sense of God around them all the time.
Well, it's very telling, isn't it, that like they have the worry, which maybe is legitimate, and then they immediately go to like, oh, we can't do this, let's die. And like you just said, that generation maybe just wouldn't have made it in Israel. And so like if that's where they go to, then that's not the right group of people to start afresh in a new land.
Right. So again, the comment was that this group of people who straight away go from we're worried about it to like, oh, just kill us off and dying, and maybe a kind of people who would legitimately not be successful in the land of Israel. They would not be able to live there. So and I think you can see, like, people talk about the growth of Am Yisrael as a child to an adult, and that the infancy stage is really in the desert, where they're so dependent on God all the time for every little thing, for the man, for the water, for the protection, for everything, and they need the constant hand of Hashem, which is the same for children. Little children need like constant reassurance. They need to know that they're always safe. They need to see that they're safe and feel that they're safe. And if they don't for a moment, it's like full meltdown, right? They can't comprehend the world. And that is, I think, very similar to this generation who can't comprehend the world without it. But when they move into the land and they eventually have to live much more independent lives, that these infancy stage would not survive. So this generation really had to die out in a very traumatic way for the next generations who have that faith in Hashem that they're there. It's also I've heard it talked about in terms of trauma, that this is a generation who experienced obviously the most severe trauma. They came from slaves, and so they can't ever really fathom a regular life. They'll never be able to make a normal, a sort of comfortable, independent, healthy life by themselves on the land.
Or become rulers, essentially.
Or become the rulers of the land, right? Like kick out everybody else and be like a healthy, normal society. They're just never going to be able to do that because they've never experienced a healthy, normal society at all. So it does, even that takes generations to really build. But, it feels very dramatic when Hashem says everybody has to die in the desert. But I think on further reflection, it makes some sense why it had to be that way and why they couldn't go in. And this, I think, is also a part of the leadership styles that Caleb and Yoshua both display here, because they do display, each of them on their own, very interesting, they do display leadership, both of them, but the nation only responds to one type and not another type. Yoshua, yes, sorry.
What I find very striking is when they said, we felt like grasshoppers. We were like insects. And that's what they thought of us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do they know what the other people? Weren't they spies? Like, what if they might not even been seen? They assume that the others look down on them like they are grasshoppers, and it's just like so like non-heroic.
Right.
They just, I think maybe God had enough of them. What did I bring out a nation of grasshoppers here?
Right.
Obviously, they're just hopeless.
I think just to repeat.
Such low self-esteem.
Right, that the comment was that that the spies referred to themselves as grasshoppers, and how do they know the other nation thinks of them as grasshoppers. That's what they say. Oh, they thought we were grasshoppers. How do they know that? They don't know that. Like, why do they think of themselves this way? Like, what a terribly unheroic, like, you're a spy, you're meant to be, like, very suave and, like, you know, very, like, on the DL, and instead they think they're, like, lower than insects. But I think it really harkens back to what they actually were thought of in Egypt. So they're really just returning to what they have been told before. And, you know, when a people are dehumanized, it's very easy to stay in that form of dehumanization, and it's very challenging to bring back personhood to somebody. And this is a generation that were completely dehumanized. They were just chattel, they were slaves, they were like grasshoppers to the Egyptians, and they fall back into that pattern very, very quickly. This is not like the Gur Aryeh of Yehuda. Like, where is that lion cub? Where are these people, these strong, upstanding, correct? Like, they don't exist yet because they haven't existed yet. Yes?
Can I just say that makes it even more remarkable when you think about Holocaust survivors and how they built themselves back up after the dehumanization that they went through. How heroic were they?
Right.
Compared to these people.
Right, and it's talking about the heroism of Holocaust survivors who build up humanhood again. And it really is remarkable, and it's really something special that the Jewish people have been able to do multiple times in history, to rebuild after near annihilation, which not a lot of people have been able to do. It's very remarkable, yeah. But not this generation. This generation are not successful at that. And so they respond to the leadership that matches that energy and matches that frequency at that time. Because Yeshua is a leader who takes his lead from Moshe, takes his power from Moshe, takes his everything from Moshe. And also his religious view when Yeshua talks, like we read before, he says, remain loyal to Hashem. Just don't rebel against Hashem. Don't do anything to make Hashem angry at you. And we'll be fine. Hashem is going to help us. Hashem is going to take us through everything we need to go through. He's relying on the external validation, that external affirmation that Hashem has shown him in his lifetime many, many times. He's shown it both to Moshe and to Yeshua, and so that's the way that they view the world. Like the miracle of the conquering of the land, the multiple miracles that happen when Hashem halts the sun so that they can chase the enemy, and of course the falling of the walls of Nineveh, just marching around the walls with shofarot and the walls just fall down. This is to be expected for Yeshua. This is exactly what he thinks is going to happen. He's not surprised at all. This is his complete worldview. That's for him and for Moshe. But Kalev is completely different. Kalev never seeks that external affirmation. He never seeks to be relying on Hashem in such a manifesting, such a real corporeal way. Kalev is extremely independent. He relies on his own truth, on what he saw for himself. And he speaks that truth to everybody. He doesn't care that he's by himself. He's courageous in that way. He will completely stand alone and stand up for what he thinks is right. And his religious worldview is not, looking for the manifestation of Hashem in every tiny little thing that happens, but just trusting that Hashem is taking care of the grand plan, that he brought us here because we're supposed to be here, because we can do this thing that's here in front of us. And it requires no justification, no miracles. He doesn't say, yeah, with Hashem's help, we'll beat them all. He's just like, no, we can do it. But he is not a type of leader that can replace Moshe. This generation does not respond to him. When he talks like that, they actually tell him, we're going to stone you. We're going to kill you. Because they cannot understand what he's talking about. They only respond to the leadership of Moshe and Yeshua at this time, of that very loving, very ever-present, gentle, parental hand that Hashem has on them all the time is the minimum that they need to believe in Hashem, the minimum for them to continue to want to stay alive, to not want to die in the desert. So Yeshua and Moshe both are really the two of a kind, the pea in the pod, the ones that go together. And this is a leadership that Moshe starts and ends with Yeshua. it cannot continue for a very long time. Moshe starts the job, and he's supposed to finish it, but he can't. So Yeshua finishes it. He takes them out of Egypt, wanders in the desert, and then goes off to die. And Yeshua takes them into the land and conquers the land. After the conquering of the land, the leadership style begins to change. Yeshua's legacy does not endure. Yeshua has no children, and he's called by the people Yeshua with no head, as if he's already dead because he doesn't have a child. And because he doesn't have a child, there's understanding from everybody that this leadership will not continue. It's going to end with him. That's why they call him no head. It ends with you. And he already starts to introduce this earlier than maybe, earlier than his death. He begins to introduce it himself when the tribes have conquered the land, parts of the land. He says, okay, now everybody go off and conquer the bits that are yours. And some tribes never do it. They don't ever manage to conquer their full nachala, and they never have their full nachala. And all they had to do was do exactly what they had already been doing all this time. But they can't take that initiative, they can't take that action in order to possess what already is ordained to belong to them. And the tribe that is the most successful, that does it straight away, is the tribe of Yeshua. This is Kalev's tribe. This is the tribe that can easily take action, that can easily take initiative. And this is the attribute of leadership that endures for the generations. Otniel is the first shafet. After Yeshua dies, we move into shaftim. Otniel ben Kenaz. Otniel ben Kenaz is Kalev's son-in-law. He marries Achsa. And he is of the same tribe of Yehuda, which of course David is from Yehuda as well. And David is someone who takes initiative all the time, so much so that Hashem actually has to hold him back from running too fast. He wants to run to build the Beit Hamikdash, and Hashem holds him back. And so that enduring leadership style, when the time is right, this is the one that will see us through for generations and generations. But the one of Moshe and Yeshua ends with them. And just like Kalev, and just like Otniel and David and all those leaders and the people from Yehuda, we have to try and take that initiative in our life and in our own religious life, and not be constantly waiting for signs and miracles and waiting for Hashem to point with signposts this way, walk this way, or walk that way. We have to try and decide that we are where we are because Hashem thinks we can do this. And it doesn't mean without challenges. Everybody experiences those challenges. But if you take that initiative to surge forward, that is the everlasting leadership style. And there's an Israeli expression called Rosh Gadol. It means a big head. It means the opposite to what it means in English. In English, it means you think a lot of yourself. But in Israel, it means you don't really think a lot of yourself, and you're happy to do any job that you see. You can take the initiative, you can do whatever you want, and you can help everybody by doing that. That's Rosh Gadol. And this is something actually that Tova was very big on in Lindenbaum, on independence and Rosh Gadol, and in learning and in life. And I just want to say a story from her that when I was learning at Lindenbaum, I heard that there was a shiur being given by Rabbi Sachs only to Bnei Akiva, and I really wanted to go. So I went to Tova and I said, can I please go to the shiur? And I'll be a little bit late for this class. I have to leave this a little bit early, and that I'd have to do a few things. But I just you don't really get to hear Rabbi Sachs very often, and now unfortunately no one does. And she was really happy that I had taken the initiative of finding something that I wanted to go to, and I had organized it already with my teachers who'd signed off on it, and I found out where it was and how I was going to get there. And she was really proud of my initiative in my learning and of going to hear Rabbi Sachs, and she was more than happy. She was very proud of me to go and do that. So maybe all learn from her example to be proud of initiative and not to wait for Hashem to find her, but to have a Rosh Gadol and to live that way in Torah and in life. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Something? Comments?
Should we open up the Zoom to any questions or?
Sure. I took this off.
Okay, the Zoom is hereby people can unmute themselves. So.
Yeah, I'll put this back on.
It's interesting that what do you say about Moshe and Aaron falling on their faces and the others tearing their clothes? So tearing your clothes is like mourning, like it's like everything is like it's the death of kibush haaretz or something, the death of the dream. Someone's died, you know, something has died. What do you think about Moshe? To me, it seems like really scarily weak that Moshe and Aaron fall on their faces.
Interesting. So the question was that Kalev and Yoshua tear their clothes, which is a sign of mourning, and Moshe and Aaron fall on their faces. And it seems to be that one of them is mourning, maybe kibush haaretz, maybe the conquest of the land, and the other one is having not as a strong reaction. I think that the tearing of the clothes is a sign of mourning, but in Tanakh it happens, I wouldn't say infrequently, it happens here and there. It's not as the same degree as it does today. So today when someone's tearing the clothing, they are like a direct mourner themselves. But back in the ancient Near East at this time, tearing your clothes was a sign of like something bad happened to you, or you're very upset by something. It wasn't necessarily that you were the mourner. In fact, there used to be like mourners for hire, like people would like get in on the action and everybody would like tear things. And even today, there are lots of people, like when they go to the Kotel, they haven't been in a certain number of time, like we do, we tear Kriya when we go there. And at first it was like very shocking because it was like, I can't believe like I'm tearing Kriya, Chas v'shalom, I have to do this. But you do eventually like you think about really that small reason you're doing it, and it's not as connected to that like initial mourning period. So I think that Yoshua and Kalev tearing their clothes, they are maybe showing a great unhappiness and a great maybe even an anger, but I don't think they're showing like a specific mourning style. Whereas Moshe and Aaron falling on their faces, if you can imagine the leadership lying, like falling in front of Kol Ha'am, like I can't even imagine a single leader today of anywhere, in any place, that would ever do something like that, because it's so humbling and it's such a sign of failure. Just like, let me just sit like in the middle of Parliament, the Prime Minister just being like, I just have to sit down, I just have to tap out, I can't even do this anymore. Like that would, I could never imagine something like that. So I think they are very different reactions, but I don't think that one is sort of sadder or harsher than another. Yeah.
The falling on the face is their reaction, saying they are not relating to the people, they're relating to Hashem. And they're saying, Hashem, this is how can we apologize to you for what's happening here? And I think it has, it had the effect on the people. They suddenly remembered there is Hashem. If you see your leaders falling down and it's because they are relating to Hashem directly, then they suddenly realize, oh, our leaders know about Hashem, you know, what about us? Well, how much more so should we?
Right.
And it sort of waked them up.
So that's very interesting. So the comment was that Moshe and Aaron falling on their faces was, they were kind of like ignoring Am Yisrael, like not reacting to them at all, but really reacting to Hashem and remembering Hashem and falling down before Hashem. And that reminded the people to look to Hashem and to look to God and to not just think of like their own personal feelings, but actually to remember that what their leadership is thinking of is what they should be thinking of too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very good. So anyone on Zoom, I can see people.
All
I
right.
think it's all right.